Welcome to Conversations with HJM. I'm Lisa Harris-Jones.
And I'm Tommy Tompsett.
And today we have the Secretary of Budget and Management, Helene Grady, joining us. Thanks for joining.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about you. A lot of people are asking, why would someone leave such a huge job at Hopkins, where you were the CFO, treasurer, and did great things there, to come into government?
First of all, it's fantastic to be back in government. It feels really good, and I love this work. I had a fantastic experience at Hopkins. I was there 12 years on the university side and learned a ton, worked with amazing people. Hopkins has an incredible commitment to excellence, entrepreneurialism, that was just fantastic to be a part of. But I can't imagine a job, a role other than the one I have now that meets my interests and passions for government, more fully than what I'm doing right now. This administration, Governor Moore, the colleagues across the governor's team and the cabinet, in my mind, represent just such a significant opportunity for Maryland that it was a role I couldn't help but consider.
So you mentioned, you kept saying back in government, and that's because you worked within the city of Baltimore.
That's right.
What have you brought from your experience with the city of Baltimore and Hopkins into your new role?
So city government, is where the rubber really hits the road. I know that's the theme here at MACo this conference. And, you learn about resourcefulness and how to stretch, limited public dollars in the most optimal way to make a difference with the priorities that your chief executive and your elected officials are trying to drive for the citizens. And so that same principle applies probably tenfold at the state level. Similar to Hopkins, I'm going to say the entrepreneurialism, the commitment to excellence in terms of optimizing the use of every dollar that comes into the university towards the outcomes of research, student learning, and healthcare is very similar themes. So bringing those skills from both the public sector and the private sector at Hopkins to this administration in the state of Maryland, I think is just a really wonderful fit with what I'd like to be doing at this point in my career, and how I think I'm best positioned to help the administration really move things forward for Maryland.
I want to actually turn to Maryland's economy. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of pessimism from people about the economy itself. How is that pessimism guiding your efforts with regards to the budget that's going to be presented to the legislature this year?
So that's a great question, and certainly a big theme here at MACo this week. Here's what's happening. Honestly, at the start, national economy is doing surprisingly well, and surprisingly by many folks' view, in terms of the recovery post-pandemic. It's doing really well, and we're very encouraged by everything we're seeing on the national level with regard to economic recovery. When it comes to Maryland, and actually our other states around the country, we benefited tremendously during the pandemic period from some extraordinary revenues. Two in particular include the federal COVID relief funds that came into Maryland and every other state across the country. That was billions of dollars boosting our Maryland economy, our state budget during those years. Additionally, the stock market gains from 2020 and 2021, when stock market investment markets were performing extraordinarily well, led to some income tax gains for Maryland and other states that, were never envisioned to be sustained, because you go through economic cycles, and we're now on the other side of that. So Maryland, separate from the national economy, we are in a position of transition away from these extraordinary revenues that accrued to us during the pandemic years. And what we're uncovering in our first few months in office is that the fundamental economic indicators, fundamental trends in Maryland's economy are not recovering at this point at the pace that the nation and many of our other states are. And so that's where our real focus is going forward. Maryland is positioned very well to weather what's ahead. Record reserves in the rainy day fund, tribute to Governor Moore and also the General Assembly, and really key investments in recent years when the cash was available to invest. So we're positioned really well, but we're going to need to be incredibly smart, strategic, intentional, and focused going forward, particularly these next couple of years, as we weather this transition off of those extraordinary transitory revenues that happened during the pandemic, and rebuild really the fundamentals of our economy so that Maryland is competing right alongside the nation and the other states around us.
So I want to follow up on that strategic investment. So Governor Moore has spoken about he simply doesn't want to spend money. He wants to invest money and get a return on that investment. How does that guide you in developing a budget for the state?
Well, that's a great question. And I think in particular, our first budget, we were in transition. And I do think that we did a good job, the administration did, putting our print on the budget and making sure that it did align and reflect the new governor's priorities. But this is our first full budget process with the new cabinet in place. And I think it's a great question. I think particularly in light of the economic headwinds ahead and the transition period that we're in financially as a state, we're going to be more intentional, more focused, and disciplined with regard to ensuring that the dollars that we allocate toward programs, initiatives, whether they're in state government or with partners across the state, are really tied to a business case, a business plan that ties to outcomes that align with the administration's priorities, the General Assembly's priorities. So it means a lot more work up front for my cabinet colleagues who are making proposals and others across the state to be able to really articulate, preferably with evidence, that a dollar invested in the request they're making is going to have a return, whether it's a financial return in terms of the economy and growth in the tax base, or a non-financial return in terms of outcomes for families, for students, for the workforce, for employers across Maryland. That's what we're going to be keyed into. It means a more robust process in terms of making these decisions. It means probably more work on the part of the folks making the requesting.
You just mentioned it's going to be a fun process. So in your few months here, I guess it's not few, since you've been in this position, what have been the challenges?
First off, for a new administration, the transition, the first budget, being introduced first week in office, and then right into session is an incredible challenge. It's an unforgiving schedule for a new administration. And certainly me and others coming in alongside the governor and lieutenant governor knew what we were getting into, but it's real. And when you're in it, there's really nothing like it. So I would say that's challenge number one, these first few months. It's good to be past that. Secondly, I would say the challenge of particularly being new to state government, like myself, challenge of just learning, getting up to speed on the complexity of the state budget, the complexity of the session and how this works, and really building relationships, restoring trust was a big challenge for us coming into office, particularly with the General Assembly, with our partners across state government, local governments, et cetera. And I think, on both fronts, reflecting back on 7 months, I think we did well on both those fronts. But it's a pretty incredible challenge, unlike probably anything I've experienced in my professional life.
So you're at the conference. I know that your schedule is full, so I don't want to keep you much longer because we really appreciate you joining us. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience before we let you go?
I guess back on the question of challenge, one of the things we are up against as a new administration is, and probably the biggest surprise so far in 7 months, has been the extent of resources and energy that we are having to put into state government to get state government back to the level of functioning that citizens should expect and deserve. And that comes to human resources, talent, technology, investment across state government itself. It's been so surprising to me, probably the biggest surprise, the level of disinvestment, I would say neglect, and just lack of focus or urgency across many state agencies in recent years with regard to delivering service for the people. And that attention to rebuilding government in that way has been far more consuming, I think, of our time and our talent, myself, but also across our cabinet and the governor's team, than certainly I expected.
Well, the citizens of Maryland should be thankful that they have you in that seat as Secretary of Budget and Management. So we appreciate your energy and the time and the resources that you're putting into the state of Maryland.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It's great to see you guys.
So thank you. And thank you for joining us with Conversations with HJM.